let's go back to the PowerPoint then. Has everybody downloaded their, at least the Qualified Scientist form if one is going to be needed? Have you downloaded it? Okay, you've got it on your flash drive. All right, let's go back here now to the PowerPoint. All right, you're going to need a checklist for adult sponsor. Every project needs a checklist for adult sponsor. So find the checklist for adult sponsor on that web page and download checklist for adult sponsor. No project can be given a final grade in here without a completed checklist for adult sponsor form. Okay? Any questions about that? And they're not that hard, really. When you start reading them, and I've done dozens and dozens and dozens of these things, after a while it's kind of like, okay, don't need this, we need this and this. It's not that hard. You're going to be familiar enough with your stuff that you can probably fill most of this out for your adult sponsor. You'd be better qualified to fill this out for your adult sponsor than your adult sponsor might be. Okay? Because you're more familiar with the details of your research. Maybe. Okay? All right. Student checklist. Every student needs a student checklist. Every student needs a student checklist. Download student checklist 1A onto your flash drive as we speak, please. Or as I speak, please. Okay? Does anyone need more time to download the student checklist form before I move on? What? Grant needs more time? Okay. All right. A research plan. Well, you're working on that already, right? I'm just working now to go through all of them one more time and make sure all the T's are crossed and I's are dotted. All right? A research plan is required for all projects. It must incorporate all the relevant topics listed in the research plan instructions. Okay? There is a list of research plan instructions. There it is. I think when you download the student form 1A, it's the second page of that is the research plan instructions. Is it? Did you look at it and see? Madison? Okay. So that's the second page of your research plan. So if you actually were given a copy of this, it would have your student checklist on one side and the research plan instructions be on the other side. Okay? Now, it is your responsibility to study the research plan instructions. Okay? The only thing that I'm going to require before Monday is that you have gone through the research plan instructions and you have tweaked, if necessary, your research plan. Does that make sense? Some of these things on here won't apply to you. Unless you're working with animals that have backbones, you don't need vertebrate animal research. You can just about skip over that. Just breeze through it, make sure you look at it, but you won't need to study it in any great detail. Unless you're dealing with human subjects, you won't need number 1 here where it says human participants research. Okay? If you're working in a bio lab of some kind, you're probably going to need a potentially hazardous biological agents. Okay? Because you're working around them or with them. And if there's any question at all about whether it's potentially hazardous, fill it out. Okay? Better to have it than not have it. If you're working in a lab where there are any chemicals at all, and biolabs have chemicals in them, you're going to need hazardous chemicals, activities, and devices. What?
Oh, crap, I've got a lot of chemicals in them.
Yeah, okay. Even the stuff they wipe down the lab benches with in a biolab is a hazardous chemical. Okay? If you were cleaning floors at Dorman High School, there are hazardous chemicals in the cleaning solutions. You'd have to fill one of these out. Better to have it than not have it. One of the worst things that can happen to you is to be at a contest somewhere and you don't have the form you need. Better have too many of them and don't need them than to not have what you need. Okay? Yes?
What form do we fill out?
We're getting to all that. It's all in this right here. Okay? All right. This form is required for every student. It's called Approval Form 1B, and this is where your parents sign. This is where your parents say they understand what you're doing. They, at least as much as a parent who may not be an expert in this, can understand the risks. So this form is filled out when you take your research plan to your parents to read. Okay? Your parents, please do not take this to your parents and ask them to sign this form without telling them, this is my research plan, please read this first. Got it? Yes.
What if there's no danger to research?
What now?
What if there's like no danger to a project?
Doesn't matter. They need to know what you're doing. Okay? And I'm covering myself here. Yeah. I'm recording this. Okay? I've told you this. Alright? Do not have your parents sign this form. I know what happens. Mom, would you sign this? Okay. Yeah, you're shaking your head. Yeah, you know what happens, right? Don't. Okay? If it comes up that your parents have signed this without reading it, I'm going to show them this video right here. Okay? Have your parents read your research plan, then read the form, then sign it. Okay? This is like a contract here. All right? Now you notice down here there's a section for those projects that need SRC or IRB approval beforehand. Okay? And if that's the case, then this has to be signed off by the IRB or SRC chairperson. Okay? If you're at a college or university or a regulated research institution, and if you're at an industry or business type location, the person who's supervising you should know if they are a regulated research institution. Okay? You should be able to ask and get that information. Then they need to sign off on this. Did you have a question? At where you are? I don't know yet. But that's your job to find out. If you can't find out to your satisfaction, you need to make sure you check with me, and I'll go behind you and check behind you when you turn it in, or you're ready to turn it in. Okay? That it's signed. The right person has signed it. We can always go back and redo it if we have to. Okay? You do it. Huh?
How would I know who to get to sign it?
Well, who's your supervisor? Who's your research mentor? Then that's who you ask. And if you go back to that complete set of instructions, it tells you how to figure out who is the SRC chair's printed, name. Okay. Now, you probably won't need that. You're going to need the IRB approval. Okay. I've forgotten what your project is, but based on what they do there, I think you may need. I've forgotten what your project specifically is, but you may need IRB approval. You probably don't need SRC approval until the end of your process, but make sure you're familiar enough with the rules. We went back. We had that up there, right? There was lines up here what an SRC is for. Okay. Well, it wasn't really clear here, but as I go back through your projects, we'll make sure we're covered on those things. Okay. If you actually go to the International Science Fair, there will be an SRC. You see this line down at the bottom. You don't fill that stuff out at the bottom of Approval Form 1B. That doesn't happen unless you go to a regional science fair, where they will have an SRC. They will review your project. Okay? All right. So this does apply to some of you. You're at a college or university, or you're an industrial or business sort of setting, or a medical sort of setting. Studies conducted at a research institution, industrial setting, or any other work site other than home, school, or the field. Like if you're going to go do the water research we talked about at a pond, well, that's a field. Okay, that's the field. Require Forms 1C. Well, here's Form 1C. Okay, regulated research institution / industrial setting form. Okay, so Madison, that applies to you in your situation. Make sure you download that. If you're working at a college or university, make sure you download that. Make sure you're familiar with it. Please don't do this. Please don't print this out. Hand it to the guy who's supervising you or the girl who's supervising you and say, would you fill this out? That's just disrespectful. Okay? You need to know what it is. You need to fill out what you can fill out. And if you're not sure, don't fill it out. If you want me to look over with you before you take it to them, do that. But get it to them as soon as possible so they're not rushed at the end when they got 30 other people they're trying to do something for and you want them to do it today. Okay? Don't do to them what you guys do to me. No, I'm kidding. Just get it done, okay? All right. What? All right. Y'all know you do that to your teachers. You know, and your parents too. Mom, I need this tomorrow. You did that yesterday.
Wow.
Don't do that. Don't do that to your research mentor, okay? All right. Continuation studies. Nobody in here is in this situation. However, let's say that after this class is over, you decide that you're going to take your research in a new direction based on the research you do for this class. All right, listen. Just so you know, different contests have different rules. For the Society for Science and the Public contest, they require whatever project you submit, that all that research has to be done in a 1-year period, 1 calendar year. Okay? That 1 calendar year has to include the calendar year in which the contest starts. Okay? So let's say if you started right now, and the regional science fair for this year is already over. Okay? You can continue your research from this point up to 1 year from now, but anything after that you can't submit to the International Science Fair. From this point up to the Regional Science Fair, you can submit all of that. But whatever goes to the International Science Fair has to be a 1 calendar year period. Now let's say, for instance, that you work from this point forward. Now this is when you actually start your research. That's the start date. Not when you're planning it, when you start your research. Okay? You start your research, the Regional Science Fair comes along next year, a little before that year period is over with. You can actually continue research for whatever, another month. Okay, and you'll be fine. But you can't go more than 12 months of research. That doesn't mean you can't rewrite your proposal, or your plan, not your plan, but your research paper. It doesn't mean you can't work on your display. All those things you can do, but the actual research part of it has to be a 1 year period. Does that make sense? All right, and there is some overlap there because there's a period of time between the Regional Science Fair and the International Science Fair, and you have to be fair. Okay, you have to make sure you meet the rules. Okay, I just want you to know about that ahead of time. So, in the case where you do the research for this class, and your research ends in May when this class is over with, and you decide to go take your research in a different area, okay, you may be doing a continuation study. Okay, in that case, then you are going to be needing some additional paperwork. All right, Form 7. Longitudinal studies are permitted. Okay, but the main focus of your research, the longitudinal means over time. Okay, and there are some studies for which, it takes 3 years to get solid results. But the main part of what you're presenting has to be done in a year-long period leading up to that contest. Does that make sense? There are some exceptions, and if you have a situation, nobody here is going to be in that situation based on what I've seen so far. But if it ever comes up, that's what you have to take care of that when the time comes. Okay? I don't think it's going to apply to anybody. But anyway, so if anybody's changing the main focus of their research, but after this class is over with, but it's related to what you're doing in this class, you will need a continuation projects form. Does that make sense? Have I confused anybody? All right, nobody's going to need it because they're doing longitudinal research. Nobody in here has been doing longitudinal research, so we're not worried about that. We're not worried about time-based research in here. We're only worried about the case where you change the focus of the direction of your research after this class is over with. Okay? All right, human participants. This is the biggie because it requires the most red tape. All right? Human participants studies involve living individuals. Okay? If you're working with cadavers, it doesn't matter. Well, it does matter, but it doesn't matter for this. Okay? Intervention, it's where there is intervention or interaction with participants and or collection of identifiable private information. Okay? Product testing of a student invention, program, concept, etc. Does not require IRB review if it's an over-the-counter product that's being used the way that over-the-counter product is designed to be used. Does that make sense? Okay, so there are no health hazards.